good evening, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining me for this week's edition of the SMIE Consulting Midweek Roundup. I'm your host, Marty Bennett. This week on the Roundup for Wednesday, April 5th, we're going to be answering 3 questions we've been hearing from international educators over the last 7 days. Before we get into those questions, we want to thank those of you that are joining us live across our social media channels for SMIE Consulting on YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook, but also those who might be watching on repeat on those channels or catching the audio-only podcast version of the Roundup. Thank you for joining the conversation today. As we do each week, we take our questions that we ask and answer here on the Roundup from our newsletter that comes out on Monday morning. Monday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern Time, we deliver all the SMIE news fit to share. And in case you're wondering, all the SMIE news means social media and international education news. And what I'm doing now is I'm dropping into the chat the links for our most recent edition. We do an email version that you can subscribe to on our website, and I'll drop the link to that as well as a LinkedIn version, as well as an email version of the newsletter, all the SMIE news fit to share. And when we started SMIE Consulting almost 9 years ago now, we had a purpose to bring institutions together to find ways to better reach students and educators around the world. And part of that mission is to deliver news that we know for most of you, you have full-time jobs that take up more than most 40 hours a week of your time, and digesting all the news, international ed news that's out there, not only in the United States, but globally, is hard to do. And that's one thing we've committed to at SMIE Consulting, is to provide both that newsletter that comes out on Mondays as well as this roundup on Wednesdays to delve into some of the topics of the day that impact what we do in international education. So as we do each week, we cover these 3 questions out of the themes that we see developing in that newsletter. And this week is no exception. We're starting off with a topic we cover fairly regularly on the Roundup, and that is the issue of China. What is new in China? And several things have happened, obviously, since the pandemic has run its course through most countries and is now reopening for business in a lot of different ways. And there have been a number of articles that have popped up in the past week that kind of made sense to address what's happening in China as a concern. I'll share some things that we're doing at UNLV, where I work full time, to share with you what our kind of hot takes are on what's going on in the country. First up, as you know, most everyone who's ever tried to recruit students in China if they've had previously, before the pandemic, had gone there, met students at fairs, you were always asked for what your WeChat account, what your WeChat handle is, or other Chinese social media that is unique to that country, behind the Great Firewall, as they do not allow traditional Western social media platforms and even websites to penetrate the Great Firewall. That you need a VPN in order to gain access to those. And many people do in China, but the greater majority don't. And to that end, recruiting digitally in China is going to be different than anywhere else in the world. And our friends over at Sonorbis have been doing this exclusively in China for a number of years, and they're now expanding towards the rest of East Asia. And part of what they do is they focus on WeChat, on having a verified WeChat account for your university, giving you easy tools to manage it. They also provide a wealth of other information to show you timing on when to post and the content that works best, and they provide that service to you as part of their package of services. So what is important about Sonorbis that I've come to know? I've known the owner, Nico, for a number of years, and I feel very confident that they have the services that can help institutions really get a foothold in how to recruit digitally in China, because you do need to have that presence, because as we talk about all the time on the Roundup and any of my consults with universities, you have to have a presence where your audience spends their time. And in China, live where your audience lives means living on their social platforms, in their social ecosystem. So Sino Orbis will help you get there. To that end, they're having a webinar next week that will reflect some of those, the most common trends, are upcoming trends that they're seeing in the Chinese market as it reopens and becomes more re-engaged with the rest of the world beyond the politics of their government. But that's just one piece of the China, what's new in China puzzle that we'll talk about today. Also, fairs, recruitment fairs, in-person recruitment fairs are back. And that's something that's happening quite a bit. We're seeing a lot of international schools in particular that had so many struggles of their own during the pandemic, with staff being forced to leave, just because of the impossible nature of life in China during the pandemic when everything was on lockdown for months at a time. That these schools are now back open and fully in person and are now meeting regularly with university visitors, particularly through fairs. And it's good to see those happening again. The challenge really is that some things that have allowed that to occur is obviously January 8th, travel to China reopened for the rest of the world. China also recently reinstated the multiple entry 10-year visa earlier in March. And that's a real bonus for those that are looking to recruit in China. So I know for a fact I'll probably be in the next year at least, once, maybe twice, heading to China for, if not just straight recruitment, but certainly partnership work that I'll be doing in country. That's something that is now going to be possible. Right now it isn't, because flights are just outrageously expensive. $10,000 for a direct flight into China from most U.S. airports. So you have to go third countries or go from within Asia to China to make it cost effective. So not saying that you wouldn't do that anyway, but it's extremely expensive if you're just going to China for events. So in terms of what's next for China, as these fairs begin to reoccur, we've seen also Education USA is proposing fairs this fall in Shanghai and Beijing to help re-engage in person with U.S. institutions and Chinese audiences. So it's encouraging to see that happening. What you're also seeing is another trend on the back end in China, more behind just the international school community, which the majority of Chinese students coming to the U.S. are not coming through the international schools; they're coming through Chinese schools and the international sections of those schools, which are different from straight international schools. So I would say a couple of the trends that we've just seen articles on in the last week that are particularly relevant, I think, in terms of how the Chinese market is changing. And that's something that I think is important to keep your finger on the pulse. We've heard that during the pandemic, we've seen fewer Chinese students coming to the U.S. That's obviously that was impacted by the pandemic, but that was already happening a little bit before the pandemic. 2018-19, we started to see significant declines in undergraduate Chinese students coming to the U.S. What we've talked about previously here on the Roundup is that students in China now have many more options, and students that might have in the past only considered the US are also looking at the UK, at Australia, maybe even Canada as well, as they look for options for higher education. And they're being actively courted by all those countries. So as part of what we always say is having a global perspective means understanding who your competition is in the markets that you're trying to be most active in and engage students most directly. So knowing that, how do you reposition yourself and your institution, your messaging, to reach them in a more direct approach, to talk specifically about the values, not just only of your institution and your programs, your location, but the United States as a whole, and how the benefits for international students coming to the United States are quite significant and can be a real decider for some students, depending on where they are. So what they're looking for, programs, all of that, and what other countries they might be looking at as well. So that's important. Another factor on how China is changing, we've already seen this with the UK. We've seen fewer undergraduates starting to go to the UK as well, in favor of their one-year master's programs. So that demographic has shifted in the UK, where they're constantly on a one-year treadmill in terms of where the greater majority of their international students are coming from these days. So one-year master's programs means you're turning and burning every year that same class that's coming in. So for them, recruiting for one-year master's programs, a lot more Chinese students have been filtering into those. So for the UK, China's becoming more of a graduate market. And you got to remember, in the United States, adding some historical perspective here, back until the mid-noughties, Chinese graduate students were by far the largest demographic, larger of the two demographics, undergraduate and graduate students coming from China. So that trend was reversed when we saw that kind of decade-long push from 2005 to 2015, 16, where the huge swells of undergraduate Chinese students coming to the United States happened and filled a lot of state institutions to the brim with Chinese students, undergraduates, particularly places like the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, Michigan State, others that had 3, 4, 5, 6,000 Chinese students on campus, to the point where the University of Illinois actually took out insurance policies in their College of Engineering and Business, I think, for $65 million to insure against if there were ever a downturn or a significant loss of undergraduate Chinese students to their campus. And they probably paid off on that insurance policy during the pandemic. So interesting to see how the swings and roundabouts happen and change and impact demographics within particular countries. So we're now seeing, the UK is seeing it already, that more Chinese graduate students are coming than undergraduate. And we're probably going to see something similar to that here in the United States as well. Certainly more graduate students coming from China. We're seeing that at UNLV than we have in at least the recent past. Another article from China, the South China Morning Post out of Hong Kong is, in a first, more postgrads than undergrads are set to graduate in Beijing this year. So they are seeing much more of a graduate market even within the country. So we're seeing a shift, because in the past it has been a much more heavily undergraduate market, and even within China it's shifting towards a post-grad market, a master's and doctoral level programs. And that's in Beijing. That's the first time that's happening there. The city's universities have expanded graduate admissions in Beijing, and more students are seeking higher degrees due to difficulty finding work, experts say, according to the article. And interestingly, across China, and a record 11.6 million people are expected to graduate from university this year. So that the market is certainly expanding in China, a higher ed market. That's the kind of the impact over the last 20 years, where we've seen I remember going to China in the mid-noughties, where every time I would visit a university partner campus, or in Beijing in particular, Shanghai, wherever we were going, we would just see construction equipment everywhere, massive cranes, and on every campus, in every major city, just huge boom towns going on as they sought to ramp up their higher education capacity. And this is the fruit of that labor over the last 20 years. So as we see things develop in China, we're going to see perhaps a maturing of the higher ed market, becoming more of a grad market again. Whereas in the early 2000s it was strong grad. Then there was a kind of a maturing of the undergraduate market, in that became acceptable and actually encouraged for undergraduates to go overseas for degree studies and then return. Now we're seeing more staying in country and going for graduate study before they think about going overseas. So there's a lot of dynamics at play, obviously, in China. So we certainly will keep our fingers on the pulse there. Now, next topic or question of the week is shifting gears back to the States and talking about good news coming out of the U.S. Department of State. And there's 2 or 3 pieces of news that came out recently that we certainly want to highlight for everybody. And for those of you who are in ISSS offices, part of what you're joy this past week was hearing the good news that wet signatures are no longer required for DS 2019s. And how amazing is that finally happened? They've been talking about doing that for a while. I remember last August at the EdUSA Forum, State Department folks were saying, yeah, we're looking into this and assessing its plausibility. And they finally, 8 months later, have decided, yes, we're going to go ahead and we're going to make wet signatures optional, that students can have e-signed documents when they go for their appointments for visas to come to the United States on J-1 visas. So really encouraging to see that. So that's one part of the good news coming out of the State Department, and obviously long overdue if you want to be really blunt about it. But what you've seen from the State Department over the years is they do tend to move fairly slowly. And part of that is just the nature of the bureaucracy within the State Department. It is a beast sometimes, and nature of it. And frankly, it's a system that when you look at the U.S. compared to other countries, with Canada, with the UK, with Australia, they have third parties kind of running their visa system, approval of visas that go through government security checks and all that, but they have third parties running it. There isn't a required interview. So the processing is down to just the paperwork that whatever group or business is conducting that review on behalf of the government is able to do so in a much more timely fashion that isn't dependent on that 3-minute interview at the visa window. And the U.S. is fairly unique in that regard in terms of these hoops that prospective students and other visitors to the United States must jump through. And that's a longer-term challenge that isn't going to get answered today and probably won't go away anytime soon. But are there other options to do that if it's not an in-person? Can we now look at doing virtual, and how then questions of verifying biometrics and all the other things that the U.S. government does as part of their visa interview process, the physical visit to the embassy or consulate. There are two other bits of news related to the State Department. So in addition to the wet signatures finally going away as a requirement for interviews and documents when students enter the country and such, also we have seen that the DS 160 fee, that's the non-immigrant online application that every student exchange visitor has to fill out. The visa fees have been at $160 for a number of years now, and there was threatening almost doubling, I think more than doubling of that amount that was proposed by the State Department last year. They've come to their senses, I think, and realized that would be too dramatic of a increase, well above what would be normally expected, and that it only has gone up $15 or $25 from $160 to $185. So it could have been a whole lot worse for students that are looking to come this fall for studies in terms of going for visa appointments. They could have been paying upwards of I think $300+ for a visa appointment, for the visa application fee. So in addition to the SEVIS fee that we already know about. So that's and there could have been worse news, as we mentioned in the newsletter. That could have been a lot worse. So to only go up 15% as opposed to doubling, I think that's a pretty good deal. And again, inflation does impact these things, and these prices haven't changed in a number of years. So I guess we got to give. They fund themselves and their activities through the visa fees they bring in terms of consular staffing in a lot of locations. That's dependent on the visa fees that they generate for that post. So it's understandable that there needs to be some increase, and we're just glad and fortunate and thankful at least that it wasn't worse than it was. The third bit of good news, or overall news that was shared by Secretary of State Blinken in his testimony before Congress in the last week or so, and was highlighted in last week's edition of Karen Fisher's Latitudes newsletter, that 70% of all posts globally are under a month in terms of wait times for students and other non-immigrant visa categories. So that's good news indeed, particularly in the light of what's coming over the next 3 or 4 months with the summer rush. That is always the peak period for visa appointments across the globe for those that are coming to the United the wait times have decreased, and they will continue to decrease as we get closer to those summer months, and hopefully be in a much more realistic and robust opportunity for a good fall for U.S. colleges and universities in terms of their international student intakes. So we're happy to see those declines in wait times. Secretary Blinken talked about it as a priority, and as well as on the other side of it, issuing passports. And I know in my family that's particularly important. My wife and son will be joining me on an upcoming trip to the UK. For the BMI Global Scholarship Summit at the beginning of May, and I'll be able to bring them along. And my son had his applied for his first passport back in February, and it finally arrived right at the end of March. So we got ours within 8 weeks, I think. So happy that passport issuance is a priority, and apparently at a record demand for passports. So that's encouraging to see that. U.S. has got that travel itch too. We want to get out and travel again. Like we haven't before, so good to see more people doing that. So some real positive news coming out of the State Department this week. So we gotta be thankful for those opportunities to celebrate our colleagues who work in the State Department, particularly those within Education USA and Education and Cultural Affairs Bureau at State, who do the hard work on the ground around the world. But also in DC. So looking forward to catching up with them at NAFSA. And as those of you that follow Education USA news, they are not having an EduUSA forum this summer in August because NAFSA is in DC. They're bringing all their REACs, all 12, I think, maybe. I think probably 12 REACs. They've got a couple of vacancies, maybe 3 vacancies right now. So we'll have all the REACs will be in town, 50 plus advisors, probably more that they'll be sponsoring, and then another group of advisors that always come through their posts, either through Fulbright commissions or embassies or consulates where they're posted, will be able to come to NAFSA as well. So it's going to be a fairly large EduUSA pavilion this year, I think, at NAFSA in terms of staffing, and a lot more opportunities to interact with them. The country fair should be quite good as well. The Embassy Dialogue Committee's typically been responsible for that. It didn't happen last year. We're hoping it does this year. Haven't had confirmation on that yet, but hopefully it will. We have so with everything happening with EduUSA and not having their own forum in August, you can count on greater representation there amongst the advisors, and obviously all REACs will be in attendance. So hoping for some great conversations in DC for NAFSA at the end of May, beginning of June. So that's our second question. Let's move on to the third and final. And this one is for those of you who know the company, SMIE Consulting. What we do, the first part of that is social media and international ed consulting. And I'm always appreciative of organizations, particularly Inted in the past has done a number of pieces on this. Obviously, the tech companies like Synorbis that we talked about earlier, they always do pieces on the overlap between social media and international ed. And certainly international ed has become increasingly dependent on, certainly during the pandemic, but even before the pandemic, virtual tools were increasingly being used to reach students where they are in the world, because not everybody can travel to 35, 40 countries every year to recruit students. Very few do and have budget for it, but those who still want to have a global reach relied heavily on social and virtual tools to reach students. And that is certainly continuing. What you will see differently is we have to be aware of how things might change politically and how politics impacts what we do in international education. That's always something we need to have forefront of our minds as we're approaching strategies for engagement with students around the world. Is what tools are we using? And obviously, as we talked about with China earlier, we know that our Western social media isn't accessible to the greater majority of population in China unless they have a VPN, and that we need to use the platforms and tools that they use. One of the tools, not necessarily for China, because China has, as most everybody in the U.S. over the last few weeks have heard the congressional testimonies about TikTok and the impact of that program, of that social media platform, is seen as a potential threat. There are 150 million users in the United States, the majority of them young people, college-age population. So TikTok has become an important tool to reach prospective students for a number of universities. Where there has been pushback, obviously, has been at the state level, where over half of U.S. states now have some sort of ban on using TikTok on university or official devices, phones from the university or college that are state-owned colleges or universities. So that has been a significant challenge for some institutions to reaching prospective students. And this applies not just domestically, but internationally as well, since TikTok is a global platform. It's used in many countries. There's a different version of it. The parent company of TikTok, ByteDance in China, has another version of it, Douyin. That is the short-form video platform equivalent of TikTok, or the kind of the mother of TikTok in China. And our version here is something that we look to as we develop our own tools for reaching students. We got to be aware of places where we might want to use one tool. It might not be the most popular tool or even allowed in certain countries, so you have to know that. Right now, TikTok is on the chopping block for potential bans, not just among governments. I mean, Western governments have almost all banned TikTok on government devices. You've seen the U.S. do that. Canada's done that. The UK's done that. New Zealand, Australia's done it. Others are joining as well, where government devices can't use it. But we're also seeing now that there are countries that may be banning it outright, and the U.S. is one of those countries that might be happening in. So what we're talking about here with TikTok in the U.S. is one of the things the Congress is considering, as well as the Biden administration, is the ability to ban TikTok on all app stores within the U.S. So that we can't use it. And we might be able to if we have a VPN that says we're in Vietnam or some other country that doesn't ban it yet. Maybe that happens. I don't know. But that's not a practical reality for most people who want it. And certainly if the majority of your population is not on it that you're targeting, then you don't want to be using it necessarily to reach prospective students. So ISEF Monitor has done a great article this week on what are the alternatives to TikTok. And in it, they speak about talk about all the bans amongst governments, that right now the only countries that ban it outright have been India, Pakistan, and Afghanistan. But we're considering it in the U.S., as we talked about. That there are options, and that's something for those of you who are using these short-form videos. The good news is it's not the only platform out there. And internationally, you may still be able to do it unless you have an outright ban from using your own. Maybe you can use your own device, but in other countries where it's still, if it's a market that still has access to TikTok, you might be able to use that as still a way to reach those students, again, without the government bans. So we'll see what happens, but having alternative platforms on which you can use short-form video. So the concept of having that content that will play well in short form on apps like TikTok is an absolutely essential one. We know the attention span of our target audiences tend to be fairly limited, and they're not going to watch a 25-30 minute video. They're going to want something short and snappy and really speaks to them directly and keeps them on the hook for future videos that they can like you, and then they'll see more of your videos in their feeds. So what are the alternatives? We've heard about Reels. That has been around for about 4 or 5 years now. Started on Instagram, also is on Facebook because it's the same company. From Meta, Facebook and Instagram, Reels. That is short-form video as well as YouTube Shorts. YouTube's the world's largest video platform, has gotten in on that short-form game as well, and has been particularly marketing their short versions of their videos and making that to channels and producers or creators of content, this kind of short-form option for them, so that they can compete with Instagram and TikTok. And now that'll mean that if one of those goes away, Instagram and YouTube Shorts might be the only, Reels and Shorts might be the only two that you have to reach your target audiences. So Will there be others that pop up? I'm sure there will. There always is a next great thing coming, and we're probably due for something that may be out now that might be coming on the radar soon, but it hasn't exploded yet in the United States that might be able to compete and take advantage of TikTok's potential demise in the United States. We'll see what happens there. But the stats from TikTok about just how significant that platform is right now, outside of the United States, where there are actually 113 million users. We have Indonesia has almost as many TikTok users as we do. So if you're active in recruiting in Indonesia, TikTok is probably something you're going to be using. Brazil, 82 million people are using it in Brazil. Mexico, 57 million. Russia, 54 million. Maybe not as popular a market. Vietnam, almost 50 million. Philippines, 43 million. Thailand, 40 million. Turkey, 29 million. Saudi Arabia, 26 million. So huge markets out there that are also some of the top markets to the United States, with the exception of Russia. You see all of those countries on that list are prime markets for the United States in terms of recruiting international students to our colleges and universities. So you see that potentially going away as a market for us in the United States could be significant in terms of our ability to reach students. If we can no longer use TikTok in the United States, maybe we only use it when we're traveling in those countries on our own personal devices to reach students in those key markets. Or if we have in-country reps, maybe we funnel all of our content specific to those markets through them to reach students directly. So there's a lot of pressure and uncertainty at this point in time as it relates to TikTok, in terms of what do we do if it does go away as an option in the United States. But we do need to be prepared. And kudos to the folks at ICF Global and the ICF Monitor for putting out this report this week that details those important reference points for us all. So that's all we have for you this week on the Roundup. I want to thank you for being a part of the conversation, and we look forward to chatting with you again in the weeks and months to come. So until next week, have a wonderful day. Cheers.